Hey guys, and welcome back to another DAC review. Here's the deal, I already tested 10 SMSL DACs before, and from all of them I believe that 2 sounded just great, and those were the VMV D1 SE and VMV D2. Now this one is called M500 Mark III, which doesn't sound at all like their M500 Mark I, which I tested about 2 years ago, as it sounds more like their high-end series, more like their VMV series. So it goes for $530, which is a little bit more compared to its predecessors, but I assure you that all those extra pennies are worth it, since it has a much beefier digital and analog sections. Alright, so let's check what's so interesting and what's not so interesting about the newest SMSL M500 Mark III. Let's go. I'll say it right away that I don't really like its wagon-like, its elongated body, its wagon-like look, but at the same time I really appreciate its build quality. It's carved from a single block of aluminum. You have just a single metal plate on its front and another one on its back, so this is actually a very well-made product from any point of view. It has tempered glass right now, so it had, I believe, plastic on its Mark I. Which adds confidence that I'm dealing with a higher quality product. Actually, the only plastic part that you can find on this one is this volume wheel, which is made out of plastic. Otherwise, you are looking at a full metal cage and made from aluminum and glass, and that's pretty much it. When it comes to controls, you have 2 headphone jacks, from which one is a balanced 4.4mm one. You have a big display in the middle, and you have also a volume knob, which works as a menu navigator or as an on-off button. On its back, you'll find 4 digital inputs as USB, optical, coaxial, and a Bluetooth antenna socket, and there's a pair of RCA and XLR outputs, which can be variable or fixed, depending on the settings. As for tech inside it, while SMSL went with the same good old ES9038 Pro DAC chip, its analog output stage is by orders of magnitude better, because instead of 3 op-amps, it now uses 9 OPA op-amps, and I'm pretty sure that those will leave quite a positive mark when music will start playing. Its predecessors used only 2 channels from that ES9038 Pro, while this one uses all 8 channels, so basically paralleling 2 outputs for a much lower noise floor and for a much higher dynamic range. Its clocking system improved as well, basically sitting at its 3rd generation. The XMOS receiver improved as well, that unlocked its MQA capabilities. And lastly, there's a better headphone amplifier section compared to the very first M500, providing 2 watts of power on both its headphone jacks, but more on that a little bit later. Right guys, I think I'm ready to hit some eardrums. Let's go back a little bit to what I was saying 3 minutes ago, that it sounded more like the VMV line of DACs and less so compared to the entry-level units like SU6, SU8, SU9. So the very first thing that I felt with M500 Mark III is that this one is not ultra neutral, this is not ultra linear, this is not straight as a line, actually quite different. This is actually quite fun sounding. So it tilts a little bit towards mid-bass and mid-range, so there is a little bit more energy. The mid-bass is definitely a little bit elevated, there is more meat on that mid-range. And the treble output, while I cannot say that it's rolled off, I can say that there is less ringing, there is less listening fatigue, there is less sharpness, so I believe that its treble is actually quite relaxed, very easygoing, very easy to listen to. If I would describe its sound with just a single word, then that would be fun, because it was engaging always, so not ultra linear, not flat sounding. It was quite a change, and that was felt not only via its XLR or RCA outputs, but also via its headphone jack. Strangely enough, this guy is actually a little bit smoother and warmer sounding compared to anything that SMSL has done before, with the exception of the VMV-D2, and it's smoother and more organic sounding compared to anything that Tapping has done before, with the exception of D30 Pro and D78. Another change was in terms of soundstage and transient response, because I no longer found it bidimensional or, inside my head or just upfront sounding. It's not pushing everything on a single plane. It sounds more 3D in a way, so more holographic. There is definitely a little bit more air in between the notes, and there is a better depth compared to its predecessor M500 Mark I. I never tried that Mark II, so I cannot say how it sounds versus that one. Another thing that was actually quite apparent is that it never struggled with dynamics. It never struggles to deliver those dynamic peaks. It can reach those, high notes, very low notes in an instant. Usually with entry-level or mid-level DACs, especially those coming from China, those are quite relaxing. Those cannot deliver you the full force of the sub-bass or just, quick shifts in terms of dynamics. But this one is actually quite different. This one is fun sounding instead of being ultra linear, flat and almost boring. And this is actually the biggest change versus the old SMSL sound, which wanted to be ultra linear. Another spectacular change, something that I'm pretty sure comes from its much beefier analog output stage, is actually the sound stage and the depth. So what was bidimensional or almost 3D sounding, more like 2.5D sounding with all my tunes, right now felt much airier, much bigger sounding, 3D sounding for the first time compared to its predecessors. So when I replaced that Core Day with this one, driving an Ultima 3 preamplifier and then an Ultima 5 power amplifier, I felt that the room was still quite pressurized with sounds. I feel that low intensity notes were still traveling somewhere around my feet. I felt that the air was heavy to breathe, so I had all the signs that this one is quite amazing in terms of soundstage. While it was not bringing the sounds somewhere from behind the wall, as Core Dave is doing by default, it was not actually up front, it was not claustrophobic sounding like their SU6, like their SU8S. So in this regard, I believe that it's much better compared to those. The sound was not coming only from my left and from my right, and was not coming from small inception points from my loudspeakers, but it was coming in waves, like from a big wall of sound, so wave after wave after wave. So clearly it was sounding considerably bigger compared to its smaller brothers and compared to its older predecessor. So you see, it's small, it's cute, but its sounds actually quite big, quite impressive in terms of soundstage. And I remember telling always to audio engineers, guys, you need to put a much beefier output stage if you want to unlock a bigger sound stage and a much better transient response. And I'm glad that finally somebody tries putting a much beefier output stage that has a major impact on the sound stage, on transient response, punch, and naturalness, and so on. As I believe that ESS Sabre Silicon is now freed from any limitations, sounding considerably more open and more alive. Another positive change versus the original M500 DAC was felt in terms of speed and impact, or transient response as I like to call it. So the difference wasn't that big, but clearly this one was a little nimble, it was more impactful sounding, and that was so obvious with electronica and rock tunes. While it's not that mean, it's not that nasty sounding like its bigger brother SU10, it actually goes with the same tuning, so clearly it's a little bit more impressive in terms of mid-bass, mid-range, that added that fullness, that added some oomph in the bass, that added a little bit more energy in those regions. I find it snappy sounding, I find it fast sounding, and I find it impactful sounding, and that happens via its RCA and XLR outputs and a little bit less versus its headphone jacks. So it works better as a DAC-only unit because I feel that it never breaks those dynamics. It's very fast and nimble, but it's not as impressive via its headphone jacks. This is a fun sounding unit, and it does justice to modern tunes like electronica and rock, and I'm glad that finally SMSL is thinking outside the box going with a very different tuning, with a very different tonality, because it was getting already quite boring testing the same type of sound, the same tonality with all their devices. I find it pretty resolving and quite clean sounding, but since there is a much bigger accent on the fun factor, on dynamics, on bass punch, it was not trying too hard to bring all those nuances behind my tracks and put them inside my head. So while I find it quite clean and detailed, again, it was not really highlighting all those leading edges. It was not making my music sharper sounding, and it was not pointing fingers at the smallest nuances, which personally for me is a plus. There is a sensation of calmness, of rightfulness, without trying to enhance the clarity of my music. So it's not really trying to upscale my music to high resolution like several ESS-able DACs are doing. Instead, you'll feel that there is more naturalness, there is a smidge of that musicality and refinement that was lacking with low-end SMSL devices. I find it resolving enough, and for the price, I don't believe you can get a better dynamic range and resolution, as it really shines in this department. If you are wondering how this one works as a headphone amplifier, you should know that several sound elements of its DAC section carried over to its headphone amplifier, but it was not as fun and engaging via its headphone jacks, mostly because it uses an ultra-linear amplifier section that uses negative feedback to kill all those remaining traces of noise. So of course, this is a dead silent type of amplifier. You can use any kind of IEMs, ultra-sensitive IEMs or low gain. You'll never hear anything really playing in the background. As for its headphone amplifier section, it provides 2 watts on both its headphone jacks, meaning that this is not a truly balanced headphone amplifier. But, I believe that's okay because those jacks, we put them mainly for convenience. It was nicely driving several headphones of mine, like Kenerton Rogner Planar, like RZH Phobos, like Sandy Peacock, at around -18 dB. So of course there was plenty of headroom remaining on top. It sounded pretty good, but not really amazing. It worked decent with something like Sennheiser HD800S, although there was much less headroom remaining on top for some wild dynamic swings. And it didn't work that great, actually not so much with something like Odyssey LCD4 and at all with Half-Mass Vara. As a whole, it performed pretty nicely with all my headphones. It sounded great with some high sensitivity planars, high sensitivity dynamic headphones, and not so much with low sensitivity headphones. And I believe that it will sound okay as a temporary solution as a DAC plus headphone amplifier, but something mid-sized, not so expensive will sound better, like even SMSL SH9, SMSL SP400, HO200, those will sound better. Moving on to frequency response, this little guy will impress you right away in terms of bass delivery, everything that has to do with bass, quality, quantity, impact, speed, everything really. It's a little bit elevated in here, and I believe that improves the transient response a little bit. You feel that everything is a little weightier, punchier sounding, and that's quite pleasing to experience, especially with electronic tunes. It fully satisfied my bass quantity and my bass quality needs, and I do believe that this is the most impressive part about this frequency response. Contrary to popular beliefs, ESS-able DACs can still provide all the texture, all the meat you can desire in terms of mid-range, and I believe that the little guy is actually the living proof to that. While this is not exactly sweet, creamy sounding or overly dense sounding, overly warm sounding in the mid-range, it actually tries going into that direction time and time again, just providing deep vocals, long vibrations with string instruments and just natural decays. This little guy never felt thin or lifeless sounding. On the contrary, it was trying to add a little bit more meat on the bone, more emotions, more naturalness with my old jazz and old blues tunes. So in this department, I believe that you cannot go wrong with this one. Its treble performance is again going against all rules because it was never bright or spicy sounding in the treble. There is enough extension, there is enough detail, but it will never tire you down with some treble intensive tracks. Actually, I listened to a lot of rock and metal with this one. I was going even a little bit louder, only because it was quite fun and quite engaging with such musical genres. Forget about glare or digitals with the little one, because no matter how hard I tried, it never made me uncomfortable. It doesn't really roll off the upper treble, but if you need that, you can always enable those sound color options like rich or tube, which will be doing exactly that. Let's wrap up everything that I had to say about the SMSL M500 MKIII. Its DAC section is really great, and it's not reminding me at all about lower grade SMSL DACs and more like about their high-end VMV D1SC and VMV D2 DACs. It's completely noiseless via loudspeakers, via headphones, because it simply lacks any kind of noise floor. This is big sounding, this is holographic sounding, this is airy sounding, this is really amazing in terms of soundstage. Something that I cannot say about their SU8S or SU9. And finally, this is fun, this is engaging sounding as opposed to ultra linear or flat sounding. And maybe that's what I like the most about this one. If everything I just said resonated with you, then I believe its price point of $530 was fully justified. Actually, if you hurry up, you can snatch a unit like this for $450. There's a link below, so please check that out. It will work up until Christmas. As for me, this little fellow easily won my highest praise and award, so it's a gold award. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as usual, listen to more tunes. Be positive and see you around. Cheers!